Yeah, no, our mics are not
Can't hug?
No, we can't do that.
All right.
All right, let me see.
Fine,
here.
no hug, no love up here. Well, we have a big space, okay. Good morning, afternoon, whatever time it is now. So thanks for being here, Caroline.
I'm really excited to be here.
So why don't you kind of, you've been live for what? Only like 3 months now or so. So why don't you give kind of the audience the quick 2-minute pitch on Levo League?
Sure, absolutely. So essentially what we're doing is we're creating the leading career community for young professionals, and we're particularly targeting young professional women, given that that's the biggest need in the market right now in terms of rates at which people ages 20 to 30 drop out of the pipeline and have access to mentorship or don't. And so we provide free access to job opportunities, to mentors, one-on-one mentor matching, and also to the advice of really successful people who broadcast that over an interactive channel. So we provide the resources that we know are needed based on the research to really overcome the barriers that we're seeing in the pipeline.
And so these are, it's the Generation Y crowd, right? So the 20 to 30-year-olds. And you're hooking them up with mentors who kind of have been in their industries before? Is that kind of how you approach it?
So it really depends on what people are seeking from their mentorship relationships. In some cases, it's beneficial to have a mentor who's in the same industry because they can sponsor you. They know the same stakeholders that you really need to know, and they can vouch for you.
Right.
In other cases, it might not be beneficial. So we recently spoke at the New York Times, and there was a young woman who was saying that it's very tough for her to have a mentor inside the organization who she could ask objective questions to.
Right.
And so in that case, having someone who has no vested interest in your success or failure either way outside of the context of your mentorship is really important. And I always say that there are specific times when you test mentorship and advisorship, and this is the case if you're an entrepreneur and you have an advisory board. It really boils down to, is the person giving you advice that isn't necessarily good for them? Right? That's when you really, really know that someone is looking out for you,
right,
and your interest. And so that's a very important factor.
And is that, because you also do a bit of peer matching as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, do you view kind of the mentorship thing as a more core part of your business rather than the peer-to-peer matching? Like, what's more of a need out there?
So that's a great question. I think that we started very simply by saying, let's provide the advice that people need, right? So let's create service pieces or pull them in from other places and talk about how to negotiate a raise or how to build a really strong advisory board or whatever the case may be.
Right.
And the feedback that we received from our users in our beta test was we need more interaction with each other. You've created a really dynamic community of over 100,000 people who care about their career. That's why they're here. But I can't learn from my fellow commenter or participator in this office hours session. I want to be able to do that more. So we're rolling out a new profile with new features where you can refer your own friends to mentors who you think would be good for them. You can also set up coffee chats over Skype or in person and build those relationships no matter where you are. So it's all about democratizing access to information that makes you successful in your career, because all of you who are sitting here and us sitting here on stage, we are where we are because someone has believed in us and has gone out of their way to teach us and say, no, don't do that early in your career, or sponsor us and give us an opportunity that we wouldn't have otherwise had. And I think that it's our responsibility to finally use technology to scale that at a communal level so that we solve some of the issues that we have with underemployment, for example, in the United States. And that's why we've been working closely with organizations that have that same goal.
Well, so, and you're within the Gen Y age range. I'm at the high end of the Gen Y age range, I guess. Why is it so vital for this group in particular? Like, what are
why
the
Gen Y?
Yeah, why?
Well, I mean, how actively tuned in have you been to the debates about Gen Y and whether or not we're lackadaisical or whether or not we are entitled or whether or not we're geniuses?
I'm much too lazy to listen to those debates.
Okay, so there's been a little bit of a conversation about, especially from employers, how to deal with Gen Y, right? We have this wave of people who are graduating at unprecedented rates and moving into the workforce in a really tough environment, and who increasingly use social media and have fewer issues with transparency in their day-to-day lives, and employers haven't really adjusted. right? They haven't really adjusted their hiring practices
Yep.
to take into account social media, which is where we started this whole conversation. And they haven't really adjusted, their retention practices either to make sure that those people, once they're hired, are really happy and feel like they can, fulfill themselves in their career. I think Gen Y, my perspective personally is that we've been raised in an environment where we know that we can have a creative business model that can also have positive externalities, right? We were taught that. It was very ingrained in our education.
Right.
And we're moving into the workforce, and we're not always going into organizations that have internalized that yet. So if you go to a big Fortune 500 company, they might not have a corporate social responsibility area, or they might not allow you to work on side projects or be entrepreneurial. And I think that that's unfortunate because you lose a lot of talent that way. And so Gen Y is really, people don't really understand how to handle Gen Y yet.
Right.
And at the same time, this is the future generation of leaders. So you've got a really sticky problem with an unclear solution, and that's where the opportunity arises.
And do you think, in your view, I know predominantly your audience is in the United States right now, but do you view this as a worldwide problem, or are there individual challenges in the different countries you go to, or things just different amongst them?
So absolutely. First of all, culturally, there are always going to be differences in the workforces in different areas. So I personally moved around a lot in my own life. I lived in the United States, I lived in Brazil, I lived in Japan, I lived in France, and every single environment has a completely different work ethic and completely different unwritten rules, right? So we started with the United States because we're obviously based there and had started our own careers there and had sensed the need there, but there's no reason that we can't extend this approach to firstly, other English-speaking environments, but then secondly, adapt it to other, either rapidly growing economies or economies where we feel that there's a particular disparity between different types of people in the workforce who need these resources.
And you brought up obviously the predominantly female audience that you have right now. It's not exclusively female.
It's not
though.
exclusively female.
I think you said when we talked previously, you said it's about an 80-20 breakdown
Yes.
and whatnot. Why do you think it is that this resonates so much with the female audience in particular?
It's a great question. I think that a female audience, if you look sort of statistically at what's going on, has a different set of challenges. And we started out by designing for that set of challenges. So I'm personally clearly female. And you really start out when you're building your test product, designing something that meets the need, but it's obviously influenced by yourself, right? And so when we started, we realized, okay, well, women don't feel as comfortable asking for more in a salary negotiation context, or there are different words that will affect whether or not a woman or a man applies to a specific job. Mm-hmm. And we designed around solving where the biggest loss was in the pipeline, and that was for women. Now, you made a really good point about not being exclusive, because I think that it's very important that in any dialogue, you have complete openness and neutrality towards every person involved. So we have all kinds of we have users who are parents who refer this to their children who are way older than our demographic. We have young men. We have, we're really welcoming to that. I think that, there's no difference between the way that those users are treated. It's just that the product isn't specifically targeted at them. And we really believe that unless we can have frank conversations about, what brings success in the workforce and, why are there fewer women in entrepreneurship or fewer women in technology, then we're not going to make progress, and that involves everybody in the room. So it's very much an open and welcoming mindset.
And this has been, kind of a hot button debate for a long time now. We've had, why aren't there enough women in tech in general? Why aren't there more female CEOs? Why aren't there more female VCs? This kind of thing. I feel like, predominantly, I guess this argument is had on the higher end of the equation. You guys are sort of at the lower end in terms of executive versus kind of someone starting out. Is your vision kind of for the company to balance the scales by going from the bottom and working on up and kind of empowering people to do that?
So I think that we look at we very much do treat the earlier version, the earlier kind of segment of the pipeline. And the reason for that is that if you see all these issues, 20, 30 years into your career, you just have to work back to the root of those issues. So we also are very actively involved in teaching STEM to young professional women. So we work very closely with Girl Develop It. We have classes, soon to be in our own office space that we've just moved into, where we welcome people of all ages to learn front or back-end development. And we also are working even earlier with elementary, middle school, and high school students to teach them and get them more involved in STEM. So I think there are different parts of the pipeline that you have to target. We're most equipped to help people who are just leaving college and really interacting in a non-level playing field for the first time. And we know that the biggest unifying factor, so you mentioned the fact that clearly there isn't always an equal kind of balance of men and women in different areas. And
yep.
If you look at the research from HBR and you look at what Professor Groisberg has really done, the biggest unifying factor is not having access to sponsor, not having access to mentor. And so we solve that, and we can use technology to solve that. We don't have to rely on one-to-one mentorship relationships anymore when we can have one-to-many relationships that sacrifice a little bit of intimacy, but still allow enough interaction for people to learn. And it's a beautiful thing that we can do that with technology. We can finally solve issues we know have been issues. No one debates that that's an issue. But we can solve it in a tangible way, in a neutral way, and in a way that's a welcoming approach to everybody. And I think that mindset is different.
Do you also view it, do you think that our generation, the Generation Y, is different inherently than kind of the previous generations in terms of that, the gender gap that has existed? Do you think that that's a natural progression, that things would change along those lines anyway?
So if you look at the numbers, they're actually moving backwards.
Moving backwards.
Right. So after the recession, the rates of application of women versus men and of advancement have actually moved backwards, because there's been a little bit of a reverse psychological effect by which I'm very lucky that I have a job, so I'm not going to put my job on the line by asking for more. Right. I'm just going to be fortunate that I'm here and take whatever is given to me. And I think that that's obviously not a productive.
So is that an economic issue that's driving that?
I think this whole thing is an economic issue. If you have 50% of your population who's underperforming because of barriers that are there, then that's a major economic issue. Because if you solve that, and if you can with scalable technology, then imagine how much value you can unlock economically. Imagine how many more organizations you can create. Imagine how much stronger the decisions that existing organizations could make would be. We know from the research that diverse boards in terms of ethnicity and gender and age are the most successful. So if we are performing the way that we are now with our current mix, then imagine how we would perform if we were optimizing for the best decisions, and we're not. And it's a very simple economic problem that we can change.
What about the breakdown of what you guys are doing in, I assume that most of it is in urban areas and cities right now.
Right.
But, there's still a ton of people who don't live in cities. How do you kind of deal with that, with those kind of challenges?
So we have noticed something very interesting. So we launched our beta in the fall of last year and then launched our final product in March of this year. And we initially were basically focused on users from New York City and San Francisco, right? By virtue of our networks, by virtue of where we had gone to speak at colleges and other professional institutions. Now what we're noticing is that is beginning to spread into more rural areas in the United States, and it's beginning to organically spread abroad. And that's actually, I think, our sweet spot, because you have less access to mentors and less access to sound professional advice when you're living in Arizona. I use that example because I received an email from a young user a few weeks ago, which I know we had discussed.
Yep.
Then if you're sitting in New York City, you can't walk into many startups and ask them questions or volunteer to be an intern so that you can learn how a startup grows. And so we, by virtue of the way that we're constructed, are democratically accessible to anybody anywhere who has an internet connection, right? So we want to make that a welcoming experience. And what we're working on this summer is figuring out how we can really demonstrate that everybody, whether they're in New York or whether they're in anywhere in the rural United States, is absolutely welcome to use this platform and should be a champion in their local area. We have an ambassador program. We should have ambassadors in every state. We're working on that. We'll have over 150 by September who will each have local mentorship organizations, who will each really promote the benefits of our free advice in their own area. and we're going to continue to do that.
And finally, I know you have as part of your program, Sheryl Sandberg's one of your investors, and kind of you do these things with these high-profile, female both executives and founders who reach out and are able to reach a mass audience. So how important is that kind of thing? Because that seems like a pretty cool thing, a pretty cool part of your business to be able to get these women who have had a huge amount of success and get them to reach out to kind of a broader audience than they couldn't do like having one-on-one meetings.
Right. So thank you so much. I think that the importance of referential structure can't be underestimated, right? So having these women and men who are extremely successful in their own right across industries come forward and say, hey, I'm making myself available to answer your questions and share my story, and I'm going to be very honest and share mistakes that I've made, right? I'm going to share the fact that, I was fired, or I once made a bad call, or I, was once indecisive when I really should have showed more leadership. Yeah. That, I think, provides more encouragement than someone that you might know on a daily basis, because you need to have someone who you look up to professionally and whose path you want to follow. And that creates that aspiration, but it maintains the accessibility that is consistent with our overall mission.
Got it. Well, that's all the time we have today, Carolyn, but thank you very much for
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It was wonderful speaking with you. All right.